Time for us to take a deeper look at some of this week's top stories. Yeah, that means it's Friday and the roundtable discussion. The international shoe incident. Why was there such a powerful reaction in the Arab world? The worsening situation in Gaza, are Israel and the Palestinian militants headed for an even bigger conflict? And then the crisis in Zimbabwe. It only gets worse, so why can't something be done? Joining us once again, Carla Robbins, Deputy Editorial Page Editor of the New York Times, and Gideon Rose, Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs Magazine. Nice to see you both. I have to say this has actually grown on me, this segment. It's one of my favorite elements of the week.
Grown on you? That means it didn't start out well.
It means it's doing very well. Thank you very much, Carla. Well, let's start with the issue of the shoes. These were the shoes seen round the world. This was supposed to be President Bush's farewell tour. And this remarkable incident, of course, it's fantastic video, so we love to show it. But why did this strike such a chord in the Arab world?
Well, first of all, it's an incredible insult.
It is.
Shoes. Very big insult. Second of all, it's the President of the United States, and they almost whacked him in the head with a shoe. And third, unfortunately, what it really means is it shows you exactly the level of fury at the United States over the Iraq invasion and everything else over the last 8 years. And it shows how far we have to go to repair things. I mean, it is, for us, it's not the same evocative image, but the idea of anybody throwing anything at the president is pretty moving. But shoes apparently have this really, it's basic meaning. And it really means we got really far to go.
It's hugely offensive.
Yes.
It's like spitting on somebody in this part of the world. And we seem to laugh it off.
Well, I will laugh it off.
I'm not
I will
laughing
laugh
it
it off.
off.
I will actually take a contrarian take on this. I think this was one of Bush's finest moments. Not the shoe throwing, but his reaction to it. His reaction, if you keep running the tape past the throwing, was, the guy threw a shoe at me. You know what? I'm glad that Iraq is now a place in which you can throw a shoe at a leader and not be thrown into prison. And by the way,
Except
he was trying.
He was thrown into prison,
well,
and he was apparently beaten
by the Iraqi government. But the idea that the American president didn't immediately order him, whisked off and beaten, and the American president essentially laughed it off and basically modeled what a good reaction was. Well, he wanted to get his questions. Oh, by the way, let's talk about the sofa, which is what he's upset about. I thought that was actually Bush displaying what soft power really was. This is what people want to be. They want to have a government that actually you can criticize, and Bush's measured reaction, I think, was the best of the American tradition.
Yes.
I know you're chomping at the bit to say something.
Yes and no. Yes, I thought he reacted very classily, and I rarely say that about George Bush. But I also think, it reminded me of what Rumsfeld said at the time of the looting, right after the statue fell in Iraq. They're just blowing off steam. And then we saw Iraq basically destroyed. I mean, it really, once again, I believe, I'm glad he's classy. I'm glad he didn't scream Red Queen off with their head and all of that. At the same time, I think it's one more example of exactly how little this administration gets the level of fury at the United States in the Muslim world.
All right, well, sticking with the Muslim world, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians over the Gaza Strip. Yesterday, essentially, the ceasefire they've honored for about 6 months has fallen apart. Is this a new, dangerous development? It
is dangerous. It's not particularly new. And frankly, I think it ties back to the previous discussion we just had, which is that this is the Hatfields and the McCoys going at it. It's people who are so enraged at each other and so unable to get past their emotions, their sense of humiliation, their sense of grievance and outrage, that they just can't make the deal that everybody knows they need to make. And frankly, I think Bush's backing off and basically not taking umbrage. We need everybody in the Middle East not to take quite as much umbrage and to make the deals that they need to make. And the Israelis and Palestinians eventually will come together on Hamas. They'll come together on Gaza. They'll go back to some kind of truce after having had more violence. We know where this will end, but they can't quite bring themselves to suppress their emotions and move past their outrage and grievances. So you're absolutely right that there's a lot of grievance out there, but what we should be trying to model is that the need is to overcome your grievances rather than give in to them and hold grudges.
But you have a significant population, the Palestinians in Gaza, that right now are sort of being punished because of an argument between governments here.
Well, that's true. I mean, one of the unfortunate things about this truce was that neither government will acknowledge each other's existence, so nobody ever put it down on paper, nor was there an enforcement mechanism for it. But, Hamas, and I never defend Hamas, but Hamas did significantly reduce the number of rockets that were going into Israeli territory. The Israelis only somewhat opened up, the borders and the allowing for, for really critical goods to go in there. So while Hamas is basically an organization that exists on grievances, I think in this particular case the Israelis needed to do more. But I do think they'll come back to some sort of a deal. It'll probably be just as evanescent and just as uncertain as this last deal was. That's why there has to be a broader agreement on this two-state solution.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was an increase of rocket fire coming from Gaza this week, though, and it should be pointed out. Zimbabwe. This is another one. We had Robert Mugabe today, the president, who announced that he basically dared any African nation to rise up against him and militarily move to try to remove him from power. I know I asked this last week, but it just continues. What needs to be done?
Well, not much can be done. And it's actually important to discuss this because we like to think that if there's something terrible going on, something should be done about it, and we should be probably the ones doing it because we're the most powerful. But the fact is, a lot of situations we can't solve. And one of the things that we can do is, in some ways, provide a model for how people can solve their own things. I had a cousin who was actually in Kenya during the election, and what he was amazed by was not just how pleased everybody was with the Obama victory, but how shocked and amazed they were by McCain's reaction. They thought McCain's concession speech was fantastic because this was an example of a leader backing off when he lost. And Mugabe, basically, we're not going to invade, but we can, and we're not even going to pressure, frankly, the regional allies to do more.
But that's what we should be doing.
We should be doing somewhat, and they will back off because they have their own interests, and they're all venal as well, and they're not going to basically, we're not going to get much done on this. Ultimately, it's tragic, but at the same time, we can hold out hope through our own practices and our own example for how governments should behave and how democratic processes should work so that when the time comes, local actors can take from that example what they need and affect change in their own societies.
You know, I think this one is a lot more urgent than that. I mean, you've got Carla, as we talked about last week. You have refugees. We're talking about a huge level of human suffering that's going on here. And the thing that Mugabe said is right in the very basic fact that this is an African responsibility, that South Africa in particular should be taking responsibility for it. They have to pressure the people around him to get rid of this guy because cholera, knows no borders. Refugees knows no borders. This is a regional problem, and the regional leaders have to take responsibility.
And that's where, unfortunately, we have to leave it. Carla Robbins, Gideon Rose, thank you very much. May I wish you happy holidays.
Thank you.
And I look forward to talking with you in the new year.
Thanks, Martin.